At 10:47 p.m. on February 11, 2026, security forces in Burkina Faso arrested a man whose confession would expose one of the most sophisticated assassination plots in the Sahel's recent history. The target was not a politician, not a civilian leader, but the commander of the Sahel drone base, the nerve center of Burkina Faso's aerial defense capability. If successful, the operation would have decapitated the country's most critical military infrastructure, leaving the capital Ouagadougou defenseless and primed for chaos. 14 minutes later, at 11:01 p.m., the plot was officially declared foiled. But the reverberations of what was uncovered that night are still unfolding across West Africa, and what began as a single arrest has become a flashpoint in the continent's struggle for sovereignty, military autonomy, and the future of post-colonial power dynamics. The man taken into custody that Tuesday night was not acting alone. According to intelligence reports and his own televised confession, he was part of a broader network with direct links to exiled former military figures connected to Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, the officer who briefly ruled Burkina Faso in 2022 before being overthrown by Captain Ibrahim Traoré in September of that year. Damiba's departure marked the beginning of a new chapter in Burkina Faso's political trajectory, one defined by assertive nationalism, a pivot away from France, and deeper integration with Mali and Niger under the alliance of Sahel states. But his removal also created a shadow network of loyalists, displaced officers, and external actors who never fully reconciled with the new order. This arrest pulled back the curtain on that network. The operation was methodical. Investigators revealed that approximately 15 million CFA francs, roughly $25,000, had been funneled into Burkina Faso through a series of transfers routed via Ghana and Togo. The money moved through informal channels, mobile banking platforms, and foreign intermediaries who operated across porous borders with practiced anonymity. Coded messages were exchanged using encrypted apps and burner phones. Instructions were relayed through cutouts who had no direct contact with the planners. The structure was compartmentalized, designed to survive partial exposure. And the endgame was clear: eliminate the commander of the Sahel base, disrupt drone operations, and create a window of vulnerability that could be exploited for a larger destabilization effort in the capital. The Sahel drone base is not just another military installation. It is the backbone of Burkina Faso's counterinsurgency strategy in a region where jihadist groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State have waged a grinding war for over a decade. Drones provide real-time surveillance, target acquisition, and strike capability in terrain where ground forces are stretched thin and roads are mined with improvised explosives. Losing the base commander would not just remove one officer. It would create command confusion, delay operations, degrade coordination, and signal to insurgent groups that the state's reach was collapsing. For external actors interested in keeping the Sahel unstable, fragmented, and dependent, this would be a strategic windfall. For Traoré's government, it would be catastrophic. The timing of the plot is significant. Burkina Faso is not operating in isolation. Since forming the alliance of Sahel states with Mali and Niger in September 2023, the three countries have pursued a coordinated break from traditional Western security partnerships, particularly with France. French troops have been expelled. Cooperation with ECOWAS, the regional bloc long seen as influenced by Paris and Abuja, has been suspended. Russian military advisors and equipment have arrived. Turkey has expanded its drone sales to the region. The Sahel is recalibrating, and that recalibration threatens entrenched interests both within the region and beyond it. A successful assassination at Sahel would have been more than a tactical blow. It would have been a symbolic rupture, proof that the new Sahel order is vulnerable, that its leaders can be reached, and that resistance to their project is alive and organized. But the plot failed, and its failure was not accidental. Burkina Faso's intelligence apparatus, rebuilt and restructured under Traore, had been tracking suspicious financial flows and communications for weeks. Collaboration with Malian and Nigerian counterparts, enabled by the Alliance of Sahel States framework, allowed for cross-border intelligence sharing that would have been far more difficult under the previous ECOWAS-dominated system. When the suspect was arrested, authorities already had a detailed picture of the network structure, funding sources, and operational timeline. The interrogation that followed, portions of which were later broadcast on national television, provided confirmation. The suspect named contacts, described the chain of communication, detailed the money trail, and implicated foreign intermediaries operating in neighboring states. Ibrahim Traoré's response was immediate and multi-layered. Within hours of the confession, he ordered the closure of Burkina Faso's borders with Ghana and Togo, the two countries through which the 15 million CFA francs had been routed. Security forces were mobilized along border zones. Checkpoints were reinforced. Intelligence units were deployed to monitor communications and movement in real time. Simultaneously, Traoré convened emergency consultations with his counterparts in Mali and Niger. The message was clear. This was not just a Burkinabe problem. It was a Sahel problem, and it required a Sahel solution. The televised confession played a crucial role in shaping public perception. In a region where coups, conspiracies, and shadow networks are part of the political vocabulary, transparency, even selective transparency, can be a powerful tool. By allowing the suspect to speak on camera, the government demonstrated that the threat was real, that it had been neutralized, and that the state remained in control. It also sent a message to potential collaborators, both inside and outside the country. Your networks are penetrated, your plans are known, and the consequences are severe. This is political communication as deterrence. And in a context where rumors and disinformation spread faster than official statements, it was a calculated move to seize the narrative. But the confession also raised questions. Who were the foreign intermediaries? What governments, if any, were aware of the plot? Was this purely a network of exiled officers and opportunistic financiers, or was there state-level involvement? Traoré's government has stopped short of naming specific countries, but the geography of the money trail, Ghana and Togo, is telling. Both nations remain members of ECOWAS and maintain close ties with Western partners, particularly France. Both have complicated relationships with the military governments in the Sahel, and both have been accused, rightly or wrongly, of serving as bases for opposition groups and disgruntled elites seeking to undermine the AES project. Whether those accusations hold up under scrutiny is less important in the short term than the fact that they are being made. Perception drives policy. And in the Sahel right now, perception is hardening into suspicion. The failed assassination attempt has had immediate tactical and strategic effects. Domestically, it has strengthened Traoré's hand. Critics who questioned his centralization of power, his purges of the officer corps, or his break with ECOWAS now face a narrative in which those measures appear justified. The plot, after all, originated from within the security establishment, or at least from actors with deep knowledge of military operations and access to sensitive information. This validates Traoré's argument that the transition he leads is still contested, that enemies of the revolution, to use the language increasingly common in Ouagadougou, remain active, and that vigilance cannot be relaxed. It also provides political cover for further security measures, expanded surveillance, and tighter control over information flows. At the regional level, the incident has accelerated military and intelligence coordination within the alliance of Sahel states. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have moved beyond rhetoric and into operational alignment. Joint patrols along shared borders are now routine. Intelligence sharing has become institutionalized. Procurement of weapons, drones, and communications equipment is increasingly coordinated to ensure interoperability. What was once a loose coalition of ideologically aligned governments is hardening into a security bloc with its own command structures, its own threat assessments, and its own strategic priorities. The failed coup attempt did not create this process, but it has undeniably accelerated it. And then there is the broader geopolitical dimension. The Sahel is not an isolated theater. It is a region where global powers, regional actors, and non-state networks intersect. France, despite its troop withdrawals, retains economic interests, intelligence assets, and political relationships across West Africa. The United States maintains drone bases and special operations partnerships in the region, focused primarily on counterterrorism. Russia has expanded its footprint through the Wagner Group, now rebranded and restructured, but still active in Mali and the Central African Republic. Turkey, China, and the Gulf states are all maneuvering for influence. In this environment, instability in Burkina Faso is not just a local crisis. It is an opportunity for some and a threat for others. If the plot had succeeded, if the Sahel base commander had been killed and Burkina Faso's drone operations disrupted, the ripple effects would have been immediate. Jihadist groups would have exploited the chaos. ECOWAS, under pressure from Nigeria and Côte d'Ivoire, might have revived discussions of military intervention. France could have positioned itself as a stabilizing force, offering intelligence or logistical support in exchange for renewed access. And the alliance of Sahel states, still fragile in its early stages, might have fractured under the weight of internal betrayal and external pressure. That did not happen, but the fact that it almost did is a reminder of how precarious the current balance is. What makes this moment particularly volatile is that it comes at a time when the Sahel's military governments are not just resisting external influence, they are actively constructing an alternative. The alliance of Sahel states is more than a defense pact. It is an ideological project rooted in sovereignty, self-reliance, and rejection of what its leaders describe as neo-colonial interference. This is not empty rhetoric. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have all taken concrete steps to reduce dependency on former colonial powers. They have renegotiated mining contracts, expelled foreign troops, sought new security partners, and begun to articulate a vision of African autonomy that resonates, particularly among younger populations across the continent. The assassination plot in this context looks less like an isolated act of violence and more like an attempt to derail a political experiment that challenges entrenched hierarchies. The question now is whether this experiment can survive its enemies. Because those enemies are real, they are resourced, and they are patient. Some are external, governments and corporations with vested interests in maintaining access to the Sahel's gold, uranium, and strategic geography. Others are internal. Elites displaced by the coups, military factions sidelined in the new order, and civilians exhausted by insecurity and economic hardship. The Traore government has survived this assassination attempt. But survival is not the same as stability, and stability is not the same as legitimacy. To consolidate power, Traore will need more than effective intelligence services. He will need to deliver security, economic development, and a sense that the sacrifices being demanded, border closures, military mobilization, constrained civil liberties, are leading somewhere. The border closures with Ghana and Togo are a case in point. They are tactically sound. They disrupt the networks that funded the plot. They send a signal that Burkina Faso will not tolerate being used as a battleground for proxy conflicts. But they also have economic consequences. Informal trade across those borders sustains livelihoods. Remittances flow through those channels. Families are divided by those lines on the map. If the closures drag on, if they are perceived as collective punishment rather than targeted security measures, they could erode public support. And in a region where governments are often more fragile than they appear, public support is the difference between resilience and collapse. What happens next could redefine the region. If Burkina Faso uses this moment to deepen coordination with Mali and Niger, to institutionalize intelligence sharing, to build a genuinely autonomous security architecture, the alliance of Sahel states could emerge as a durable counterweight to ECOWAS and its external backers. If, on the other hand, internal fractures widen, if economic pressures mount, if the population begins to question whether the new order is any better than the old one, the window for destabilization will reopen. And the networks that planned this assassination, battered but not destroyed, will try again. There is also the question of accountability. Who will be held responsible for the plot? The suspect in custody is one node in a larger web. But webs have centers. They have funders. They have strategists. If Traore's government can expose the full network, can trace the money back to its source, can name the foreign intermediaries and the states that sheltered them, it will have a powerful tool for delegitimizing its opponents. But exposure requires evidence. It requires forensic financial analysis, digital investigation, and international cooperation that may or may not be forthcoming. If the investigation stalls, if the story fades, if the suspect remains the only public face of the conspiracy, the opportunity to reshape the narrative will be lost. The failed plot has exposed something deeper than a single conspiracy. It has revealed the anatomy of resistance to the Sahel's transformation. This was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was a structured operation with foreign financing, exile networks, and strategic targeting. The fact that it reached the stage of active preparation, that money crossed borders, that a suspect was positioned and ready, means the infrastructure for destabilization exists and remains operational. Dismantling one cell does not eliminate the network. And as long as the network survives, the threat persists. Traore now faces a dual challenge. Externally, he must convince regional and international observers that Burkina Faso is not descending into paranoia and purges, that his response is measured and intelligence-driven rather than reactionary. Internally, he must convince his own population that the disruptions, the border closures, the heightened security presence, are temporary measures protecting a viable path forward, not permanent features of authoritarian rule. Balancing these imperatives while maintaining operational security and pursuing the conspirators is the kind of high-wire act that has broken other post-coup governments. But there is also an opportunity here. The arrest has given Traore leverage. He can use it to extract concessions from neighboring states, to demand greater accountability for cross-border financial flows, to pressure ECOWAS into acknowledging the security vacuums its policies have created. He can use it to deepen coordination with Mali and Niger, turning the alliance of Sahel states from a symbolic partnership into an operational reality, with shared intelligence fusion centers, joint rapid response units, and coordinated border management. The question is whether he has the political skill and institutional capacity to capitalize on this moment before the next crisis arrives. Because the next crisis will arrive. The Sahel is not stabilizing. Jihadist violence continues. Climate pressures are intensifying. Youth unemployment remains staggering. And the geopolitical competition over the region's resources and strategic position is accelerating, not receding. Every external actor with interests in West Africa is watching Burkina Faso closely. Some want Traore to succeed because his success would validate a model of African autonomy that could spread. Others want him to fail because his failure would justify renewed intervention and reassert old hierarchies. The assassination plot was one move in that larger game. It will not be the last. What makes this moment historically significant is that it represents a test case for post-colonial sovereignty in real time. Can a landlocked Sahel nation with limited resources, surrounded by hostile networks and competing powers, chart an independent course? Can it build security infrastructure without relying on former colonial patrons? Can it sustain public legitimacy while operating under siege conditions? The answers to these questions will resonate far beyond Burkina Faso. They will shape how other African states approach their own security partnerships, how they negotiate with external powers, and how they understand the possibilities and limits of sovereignty in the 21st century. At 11:01 p.m. on February 11, 2026, a plot was foiled. But the struggle it represents over power, autonomy, and the future of the Sahel is just beginning. And the world is watching to see who writes the next chapter. This is where the stakes become clear. The failed assassination attempt is not just about one man, one base, or one night in February. It is about whether a generation of African leaders who came to power through coups, who rejected the security frameworks inherited from colonialism, who pivoted toward new partners and new ideologies, can survive long enough to prove that their vision is viable. It is about whether sovereignty in the Sahel and beyond is something that can be asserted or only something that is granted. And it is about whether the post-Cold War order, in which Western powers shaped African security policy through aid, training, and selective intervention, is giving way to something fundamentally different. Ibrahim Traoré is 36 years old. He is the youngest head of state in Africa. He came to power not through elections, but through force. He governs a country where half the territory is contested by armed groups, where food insecurity is rising, and where the state's ability to provide basic services is limited. And yet he has positioned himself, intentionally or not, as the face of a new African assertiveness. His speeches invoke Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader assassinated in 1987. His policies challenge French influence. His alliances bypass traditional regional institutions. Whether this makes him a visionary or a gambler depends on whether he can deliver. And whether he can deliver depends, in part, on whether plots like the one foiled on February 11th remain failures or eventually succeed. The confession, the arrests, the border closures, these are tactical victories. But the war, if it can be called that, is strategic. It is a war over narratives, over resources, over the right to define what independence means in the 21st century. The Sahel has been a battleground for decades, first in the struggle against colonialism, then in the Cold War, and now in a multipolar scramble for influence. The difference this time is that the region's leaders are not simply choosing between external patrons. They are trying to build something autonomous. And autonomy, in a world where power is still largely determined by access to capital, technology, and military hardware, is extraordinarily difficult to achieve. The arrest on February 11th has already changed the calculus. It has demonstrated that Traoré's intelligence services are more capable than many assumed. It has shown that the alliance of Sahel states can function as a security network, not just a political declaration. It has exposed the vulnerability of opposition networks that rely on porous borders and financial opacity. But it has also revealed the depth of the threat. 15 million CFA francs is not a trivial sum in this context, but it is also not an insurmountable barrier. If this plot was funded at that level, there will be others, and those others will learn from this failure. They will compartmentalize more effectively. They will route money through more complex channels. They will choose targets that are harder to protect. The cycle of conspiracy and counterintelligence, of plots and purges, is unlikely to end anytime soon. For the people of Burkina Faso, this is not abstract geopolitics. It is daily life. It is checkpoints and curfews. It is the fear that the base near your village might be attacked. It is the uncertainty of whether the government that promises liberation can also provide security. The Traore administration has bet that Burkinabe citizens will tolerate short-term disruption, economic hardship, and restricted freedoms in exchange for long-term sovereignty and stability. That bet is still being tested, and the outcome is far from certain. What is certain is that the Sahel is no longer a passive theater where external powers set the rules. It is an active zone of contestation where local actors, military governments, armed groups, civil society movements are asserting agency in ways that disrupt old certainties. The failed assassination attempt is one data point in that larger story, but it is a significant one. It shows that the stakes are high, that the opposition is organized, and that the margin for error is thin. It also shows that Traoré's government, for now, is winning. Whether it can keep winning is the question that will define not just Burkina Faso's future, but the future of the entire region.